Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. It is a terrific turnout, as I'm sure no one is surprised, because, of course, we have John Brennan with us here this evening. Now, if you have attended one of these leadership dinners previously, you're going to see we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. So, to help us start promptly, which you have already done, gotten to your seats on time, but really to allot more time to our after-dinner conversation, which John has really asked for because he's looking forward to it, please feel free to begin eating your salads now. Little clinking of the forks is not going to bother me. So, INSA is delighted to once again host its former chairman, John Brennan, and I would like to thank Director Brennan and his staff for their enthusiastic support of INSA tonight and the leadership dinner. I would also like to recognize the sponsors who made this evening possible. AT&T, thank you, Jill, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, PwC, Eagle Ray, Leidos, CACI, and GDIT, or General Dynamics Information Technology. Please join me in acknowledging all of our sponsors. Now, the last time Director Brennan participated in a leadership dinner, I actually had the privilege of moderating that discussion. And John, as much as I relished that conversation, and I know many of you did as well, I thought there is just no way the two of us could top that a second time around. So I am delighted to turn the role of moderator over to Dr. Jennifer Sims, non-resident senior fellow on national intelligence at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Jennifer, it is so good to see you again, and thank you so much for being here. We hope you enjoy the evening, and we look forward to the upcoming discussion. And we will have a more expansive introduction of both Jennifer and John after dinner. Dr. Sims will also be taking questions from the audience, so please, there are cards at your tables, or if there aren't yet, there will be soon, for you to submit your questions for Director Brennan on the note cards. Please use your best penmanship. Dr. Sims would appreciate that. And then INSA staff will be around during dinner or right after dinner as it winds down to collect them. So to give Director Brennan and Dr. Sims time for a wide-ranging conversation, we're just going to begin dinner. And thank you all for being here. I look forward to the after-dinner conversation.
I hope you all enjoyed your dinner. The one thing I gotta always say is we just can't pull off events like this without our sponsors. So I want to add my thanks to Tish's thanks to all of our sponsors for supporting this dinner. So let's give them a hand again. So it is my pleasure, when we do these sponsorship things, to invite and introduce Jill Singer, who is a Senior Vice President with AT&T, to introduce our speakers. Jill is Vice President for National Security at AT&T Government Solutions. She has extensive experience in government and industry. Her last two government posts were as CIO for NRO and Deputy CIO at CIA. Jill's also a member of the INSA Board of Advisors. So Jill, thank you for your support, thank you for AT&T support, and come on up and introduce our speakers.
Chuck, thank you, and thanks to INSA for hosting this event this evening. Thanks to all of you for participating. I believe we're going to have a great conversation in just a moment. AT&T is pleased to be a sponsor of this leadership dinner and the conversation with Director Brennan. AT&T is an iconic American brand, and this year we celebrate our 140th birthday. We're very proud to say that we have supported the federal government for almost all of those 140 years. Moreover, we are proud to say that we have supported the predecessor organization to today's U.S. intelligence community for over 90 years. It's a long time going back. Thank you. As we look forward, AT&T is excited to harness innovative information and communications technologies such as the Internet of Things in support of intelligence. And we also look forward to our increased participation in the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for the evening. Dr. Jennifer Sims is a widely respected expert on U.S. intelligence and one who has seen it through the eyes of the executive branch, academia, and Congress. As noted earlier by Tish, she is the non-resident senior fellow for national intelligence at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, developing and running national security and law in cooperation with DePaul University. Prior to the Chicago Council, Jennifer was a professor and director of intelligence studies at Georgetown's Walsh School of Foreign Service for 9 years. Between 1994 and 2001, she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Intelligence Coordination, and then served as the State Department's first coordinator for intelligence resources and planning. Jennifer received the IC's highest civilian honor, the National Distinguished Service Medal, in 1998 for her work at the State Department. Now my pages are stuck together momentarily. Prior to the State Department, Jennifer served as Defense and Foreign Policy Advisor to Senator John Danforth and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. That was from 1990 to 1994. She received her bachelor's from Oberlin College and her master's and doctorate in European politics and national security policy from the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Sims, thank you very much for being here and moderating. Joining her on stage, is the Honorable John Brennan, the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He has been the Director of CIA since 2013, so for the past 3 years. During his tenure, Director Brennan has initiated a sweeping modernization, including the agency's first new directorate in over 50 years, the Directorate of Digital Innovation, which will position the CIA to optimally carry out its mission in the digital domain of the future. He also has pursued efforts to advance the diversity of CIA's senior ranks and ensure the inclusivity of the agency's workforce. Director Brennan's public service began 36 years ago at the CIA in the predecessor to today's Directorate of Analysis. He specialized in Near East and South Asia before directing counterterrorism analysis in the early 1990s. John graduated from Fordham University with a bachelor's in political science and later attended the University of Texas at Austin, where he earned his master's degree in government with a concentration on Middle Eastern studies. And we never miss an opportunity to highlight that in his brief respite from public service, John served as chairman of INSA from 2007 to 2008. Director Brennan, thank you for your leadership and for your generosity of your time tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Sims. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It really warms my heart to be back with INSA, an organization that I think does fabulous work binding industry with government and intelligence professionals in academia. It's a wonderful organization, and thank you so much for having me here. And John, thanks to you too for joining us for this conversation tonight. And that's what I would like to have, a conversation that looks back as well as forward. We were together 8 years ago on the Obama transition team, and we had the opportunity at that time to look at where the intelligence community stood and also where CIA was in its mission. Looking back now, these 8 years, can you reflect on the progress we've made? imagining that we're here now, all of us part of that next transition team, what would you say to them about both the strengths and weaknesses of the CIA and the larger intelligence community?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here tonight. I do have a special place in my heart for INSA since I was serving as chairman here, and it was 8 years ago. The time has gone very quickly. I must also say that although I've never been subjected to an interrogation, I presume that if I were, those lights would be the type of lights that we would be subjected to. So I don't know if this is a turnabout of something here. But I do think back, and in fact we were meeting today at the agency preparing for the new change of the administration that is going to be taking place, and reminiscing in my own mind and sharing some of my perspectives about what we had to deal with at the time as we were ushering in a new administration, a whole new national security team, changing from one political party that was in charge of the White House at the time to a different political party. And I must say, I give the Bush administration a lot of credit for just how much they did in order to ensure the smoothest transition possible. And that's what we're trying to do right now at CIA, along with OD&I and others, to ensure that the transition from the Obama administration to the next one is going to be as smooth and strong as possible. And intelligence, I think, is the continuity that really is relied upon as far as individuals who, on Inauguration Day, all of a sudden they will have responsibility for dealing with all of the world's challenges and all the issues that the United States is involved in. And so when I look back over the last 8 years, there has been such tremendous change in the global landscape. Looking just in the Middle East, an area that I have worked on, the Arab Spring had not happened at that time. The instability that has racked so many countries, authoritarian regimes that have fallen, countries such as Syria and Iraq that have been taken over in large part by a terrorist organization, as well as the challenges we face, more so now than in the past on the cyber front, which is why we set up a new directorate inside of CIA that we can talk about. But my advice to the new administration is that there are a lot of things that are going on in the world that in many respects are interconnected to one another. As we deal with Russia on Ukraine, there are implications as far as how we deal with Russia on many other issues as well. And although from the outside some things might look like they could be more easily addressed and resolved, these are the most complex issues that I've had to deal with in my 36 years in national security. And so the new team will be inheriting a series of challenges that need to be addressed simultaneously, need to be addressed in many respects comprehensively. And they really need to be able to get up to speed quickly, because the world is not going to wait for them to understand all of the intricacies and complexities that they're having to deal with.
So we've had a tremendous event in Turkey that's still ongoing, apparently. And one of the challenges is, and I know liaison is a difficult subject to talk about in an open forum, but when you have major changes underway in a NATO ally like that, how do you deal with that from an intelligence perspective? How do you work with the Turks in these moments?
Well, we have a lot of interaction with our Turkish partners on a number of fronts. First of all, because they are where they're located as far as next to Syria and all the challenges that presents to them. Counterterrorism interaction is constant and ongoing. They are a critical partner. The first thing you do when you have a situation like that is you try to ascertain the facts. And a lot of times in those early hours, it's very, very difficult, because a lot of information is coming in, and it is hard to distinguish between the rumors that are out there that seem to gain strength just by virtue of their being passed around, and also trying to understand what the situation is as far as the government, but also as far as U.S. personnel. It's one of the first things that the U.S. government thinks about. What's the status of our embassy staff in Ankara as well as in Istanbul? What are the security concerns that our folks have? But also, what is it that we need to be mindful of, as the situation was very dynamic, and that we didn't want to either jump to conclusions about who was in charge or whatever. But I think what was clear to me is that as a NATO partner, and as a government that has a democratically elected president and government, that the attempted putsch by some elements of the military was something that really threatened civil order inside of Turkey, and that's why there was very strong condemnation of the effort by not just this government, by others, and strong signals of support that were sent.
Can I ask, did we see it coming?
We there have been a number of developments in the Turkish political scene over the last several years with now President Erdogan, previously Prime Minister Erdogan, with the consolidation of power and authority. It also sits astride a very unsettled area, and with the challenges that the PKK and the Kurdish terrorists present to Turkey. So we know that there have been stresses and strains on the government, and there has been a number of actions that the government has taken to try to address some of what they perceived as opposition domestically. So we were aware of the pressures that the government was under, as well as some of the sentiments that people express. But we made sure that our policymakers were kept informed about developments in Turkey, and that's where most of our intelligence assessments go, as opposed to here.
Right.
But good try anyway, Jennifer.
Got it. But this raises an interesting question because, the terrorist attack in Nice, we've had a series of bad events, and I don't need to list them for all of us here. We know what they are. But if we define success against terrorists and ISIS in particular as countering these individual threats, and certainly we do have to try and stop terrorist incidents, but we need to understand what winning is against ISIS. How do you achieve decision advantage? How do you achieve intelligence advantage against this kind of adversary in a larger sense? How do we win? And what is intelligence's role in helping us get there?
Well, this phenomenon right now of ISIL is much different than Al-Qaeda ever was, given the sheer numbers of individuals who are involved in the organization, both in Syria and Iraq, as well as in the franchises around the world. Its growth was quite fast and expansive, and there's a phenomenon that's going on right now in the region that has taken full advantage of the unstable environment. You're right, there is the need for both the tactical and the strategic. And I think what is going to allow us to prevail, and prevail we will, is persistence and determination and attacking the organization, both downstream as well as upstream and things in between. There is a need for just constant effort to try to uncover and uproot what ISIL has sent out, either in terms of operatives, foreign individuals who have served in foreign fighters units inside of Syria and Iraq, but also to try to deal with their propagation of their venomous narrative in the internet. So this is going to, I think, take a number of years. It's not something that's going to go away quickly. I think the most important thing for us to do in terms of getting ahead of it from a strategic perspective is taking away its basis, which is in Syria and Iraq. They've controlled territory, they have revenue. It allows them to use this as a basis for their continued efforts worldwide. We're making, I think, significant progress there. They've already heralded some additional setbacks that they're going to experience, sending word to their people that despite those military reverses, they're going to continue to engage in the types of activities that they have outside of the Middle East. So this is going to take constant effort, and as good as CIA is and good as the US is, we have to work very closely with our partners in Europe and the Middle East. There needs to be an international effort and an architecture, which means sharing information, so that we're able to identify individuals that might have plans to carry out these devastating attacks, but also find out who is some of the masterminds behind orchestrating these attacks, And inside of Syria, in Raqqa, which is one of the major cities in northeastern Syria, that is the place where a lot of the external plotting takes place. So there is a multidimensional and a multiple geographic area effort to do as much damage to ISIL. At the same time, a lot of the factors and conditions that led to its growth need to be addressed. So it's not just a question of trying to destroy and dismantle as much of ISIL as possible in places like Iraq and Syria. It's trying to address some of those sectarian tensions as well as those deep-seated feelings of alienation that a number of the communities have there. And so the government in Baghdad, the government in Damascus, really needs to be seen as much more representative of the peoples of those countries. Whether or not they can be put back after all of this devastation, I think, is something to be determined. Certainly the United States is trying to keep those countries whole.
I have a handful of questions that I do want to get to from all of the folks here, but I do want to ask a question that spins off of what you just said, because certainly countering the terrorist threat, and ISIL in particular, is front and center on our national agenda. But over the years, and we were talking earlier about the fact that I'm working on a book on the history of intelligence going back to the Spanish Armada, trying to derive lessons about what makes for winning in the intelligence context. And one of the things that is important is strategic warning. And the more we focus on a single adversary, the more vulnerable we are to strategic surprise. How are we dealing with strategic surprise today and the warning problem? If we think of warning solely in the context of the highest requirements of policymakers, we're still staring in an inbox. That may be tactical warning in the sense that we're already looking there. But a savvy adversary will look where we're not looking and try and operate there. Strategic warning, therefore, is particularly challenging because you almost have to get outside the policymaker's inbox and say, what is the policymaker not thinking about that could bite us where we're most vulnerable? Are you satisfied that we are correctly positioned on strategic warning today?
I've come to realize that the world is a very big place and that the United States is the world's sole superpower. From a political, economic, military perspective, no matter what happens anywhere on this globe, the United States is looked to help to try to address the problems that are there. No other country has either that capability, potential capability, as well as that reputation, as well as being looked to. So while we're dealing with the situation in Syria and Iraq or Libya or North Korea, we also have to be worried about what's going on in Venezuela. Is it close to some type of implosion? Or what's going on in the Central African Republic? What's happening in South Sudan? Are we looking at potential humanitarian devastation or genocide? And so the CIA, which has a global responsibility, we are frequently the organization working with our partners in the intelligence community that is asked for what's happening, because we have people around the globe. We have relationships with security services around the globe. And so although we're focused on maybe a big issue today, which is dominating our inbox, like a Turkey and the coup that was attempted last week, we cannot lose sight of what's going on in other places because we keep having to pivot from one to the next to the next. And so are we positioned for that strategic warning? The demands have gone up. The demand signal has gone up as far as what the policymakers want from intelligence in terms of the insight, the knowledge, the information about what the situation is, what the opportunities are, what the dynamics are that are underway. And what we need to do is to make sure that we're able to optimally utilize our resources so that we have as much coverage as possible on all these issues, regional, country, functional, which is why we decided as an organization last year that we were going to restructure, because I am a very strong believer that integration of effort and capability and expertise and tools will give you much greater ability to address multiple issues simultaneously. And I felt that the organization structure of CIA was not optimally configured to give us that. And I think this is going to allow us to have a better opportunity to ensure that the various regions of the world have constant attention of CIA officers who are working together to identify what might be over the horizon. And it's not just a question of what's blazing today, it is what is starting to emerge. And you need to have a variety of professional experiences, a variety of backgrounds and experiences in order to understand what is happening. Because it may not be the type of political instability we've seen in the Arab Spring. It's something much more insidious, much less obvious. And the agency, working with our great partners at NGA, NSA, and others, are able to, I think, keep a watch over these areas and see if we can pick up, some of those early indicators. I must say, there are actions that individuals take that is very difficult for us as an intelligence community to discern in advance. The decision-making process inside of Moscow is very closed, and a lot resides in the head of one individual in consultation with others. So they can make decisions very quickly that might not be able to have any type of advance warning on. So this is increasingly a challenge. That's why we need to make sure that we are as best positioned as possible to be able to dedicate as many resources to as many of these problems as possible.
So, speaking of getting inside of the heads of hard target country leaders, how are we doing on Iran? Are you confident that we have the capabilities we need to monitor the Iranian agreement?
I am confident that the U.S. intelligence community is second to none in terms of its ability to look for the signs, the indications that things are happening that may be inconsistent with the agreement that Iran reached. We also have the benefit of having a very intrusive inspection regime as far as the IAEA is concerned. So there are a number of different features of that agreement that complement what it is that the U.S. intelligence community is able to do, which is then further complemented by a number of other intelligence agencies worldwide that have keen interest in trying to detect whether or not Iran is trying to circumvent some of these arrangements, as well as working on the terrorist front or the troublemaking front or ballistic missiles. So I'm never going to say we have perfect view or insight, but I do believe that the weight of the intelligence community, the capabilities of this intelligence community are dedicated appropriately to deal with that type of eventuality.
Okay. I have a number of questions here on your modernization program, and particularly your centers. So could you talk a little bit more about the rationale behind the centers and whether they've made a difference and where the problems have been, if there have been any?
The whole concept behind CIA's modernization effort was to try to leverage in a more integrated fashion, as I mentioned, the tremendous capabilities, expertise, authorities that the agency has. Having worked at the agency in my first stint for 25 years and then working with it from the White House and now, I felt that the CIA's structure, which was really started in the 50s and in the early 60s and has stayed with the directorate structure, did not allow our officers to be able to interact with one another in a way that I believe is very empowering. I had some great opportunities throughout my career working in CIA's Counterterrorism Center and then working as part of the National Counterterrorism Center stand-up to be part of efforts where you have people from different backgrounds, different agencies and departments who have different data sets and different ways to look at things. When you bring them together, I found it to be very enlightening for the people who were part of that team. We do it when there's a crisis. We form a task force. We bring those people together and we say, okay, we need to have the type of speed and integration of effort to deal with this crisis. Well, if we need it for a crisis, why aren't we doing it on a regular basis? Because to me, we're facing crises on a regular, every day. The military went through the process with Goldwater Nichols back in the 80s. I can't imagine what the U.S. military would be like right now if we still had separate services operating independent of one another. The combatant command structure, that integrated command, really, I think, demonstrates that we can gain more from those individual parts if we're able to integrate them in a common mission. So I know people have raised questions about, well, you're bringing analysts together with, case officers or operations officers, and is that going to affect the integrity and objectivity of analysts? And I met with a new group of analysts earlier this week, and I told them that as an analyst, you should be thirsting for whatever data, whatever input, whatever additional perspective you can get, because that really is going to allow you to put all those pieces together, and then for you to do the analysis and bring your tradecraft expertise to bear in order to provide the type of assessment and that all-source finished analysis to the policymaker. So operations officers and case officers who have spent many, many years overseas, they have some real feel for what's going on in these societies and these cultures. And so the analysts want that type of input and interaction. So again, the construct is we have 6 regional centers, 4 functional centers. Each one of our now 5 directorates have deployed officers there. They're working as teams. I want the motherships of the directorates to be able to fuel and support these mission centers. They should be providing the type of assistance and help that they need, and the people in the center should be reaching back to the mothership for additional help or assistance or the tools. We have responsibility in the intelligence community for open source. The open source enterprise has been a tremendous, I think, advantage as far as trying to fulfill our various missions. And we're trying to deploy more and more of these open source specialists into our mission centers, because whether or not you're doing analysis or operations or targeting or liaison work or anything, having the ability to leverage the open source environment and the open source tools and bring it together with your clandestinely acquired information is just so enriching in terms of how we're able to understand and create new knowledge, which is the real objective of intelligence officers. Uncover new information, create new knowledge by putting the pieces of information together, and with that correlation, you now have new knowledge. So I am very excited about where the agency is going. Yes, a big organization that goes through a modernization is going to experience dislocations. And people who grew up in the organization over the last 20 or 30 years is like, oh God, what is Brennan doing now? And I think the initial opposition in some quarters to this really has dissipated as we've been able to explain what the purpose is. And what I've said to our people is, we're not trying to homogenize everybody and create, a single intelligence officer. We use the term intelligence officer first because every officer in CIA has to understand how what they do is part of the intelligence mission of CIA. If you cannot explain how what you are able to contribute to that, you're missing something, and we're missing something because we're not leveraging you appropriately. So I think as people have come to understand that this truly is an empowering organizational structure, I certainly believe it is, I think we have seen more and more people say, let's see if we can work in this team environment in order to accomplish our all-source analysis mission, our clandestine collection, both human and technical, our counterintelligence mission, our covert action mission, and I include a 5th mission in here, which is our liaison mission, because CIA has tremendous responsibility to interact as robustly as possible with all of these intelligence security services around the world, whether we're dealing with terrorists or proliferators or instability. And by having these mission centers where officers of different backgrounds, different tradecraft experiences and capabilities, it is, again, I think, a very empowering environment that will allow the agency to have better opportunity to cover the world's challenges more effectively and more efficiently.
Does it also help bridge with the policy community? Having been on the policy side, are these centers sort of the belly buttons into the intelligence community for policymaking as well?
Absolutely. And what we're trying to do is to lend greater internal coherence to the agency, just so that all of us within the agency understand how we can interoperate with one another more effectively. But also, it's much more understandable to the outside. In the past, people would say, I want to go to the agency for this issue, whatever. Well, what aspect of this issue do you want to go to? Now we have assistant directors of CIA who are responsible for the Near East, or Africa, or counterterrorism, counter proliferation. And so from the outside, they have counterparts, assistant secretaries,
Right.
senior directors down at the NSC. And so it is much more, I think, hospitable for people to engage with the agency because it is a more coherent organizational structure.
Right. I have two, though, questions, and maybe it's because there's part of me that's still old school, and I'm not, I've been out of the intelligence community for some years now, but two questions come to mind. And the first one is counterintelligence. I'm not sure I understand why counterintelligence is a center instead of a directorate. Counterintelligence, I believe, has been for years misunderstood or underplayed in the U.S. intelligence establishment. And I wonder how it operates as a center and why a decision was made not to think of it as a resource, an agency-wide resource that can feed into the other centers. So that's question number one. Question number two is I wonder about the limits of integration, frankly, because one of the things about the community is the richness of the diversity of the cultures within the community. And I know we all talk about integration as being an important thing. It was one of the lessons we learned from 9/11. On the other hand, when people are being asked to risk their lives, as you well know, there is something to the culture, there's something to the mothership that is important. All this talk about breaking down cultural walls, well, there's a purpose to that culture because it makes people feel as if each other has their back. So too much integration can sometimes break down that esprit de corps, that sense of family, and it can also, I would worry that it would lead to less diversity of view when you sit around the table and hash things out. The station chief coming back with his view on a political situation that is vastly different from an analytic view. So when I think about wanting to keep that vibrant diversity of view and that rich set of cultures within the intelligence community, I wonder when we've reached the limit of integration.
On the first issue, counterintelligence is a mission. It is absolutely a mission. The directorates represent capabilities. You have the Directorate of Operations, Analysis, Science Technology, Support, and Digital Innovation. Those are capabilities that need to infuse the mission throughout the organization. The Counterintelligence Mission Center is a mission in itself, just like counterproliferation and counterterrorism. It has enterprise-wide responsibilities. It interacts with the rest of the mission centers, but it's not a capability. It needs to have the operations, the analysis, the science, technology, digital innovation in order to carry out that mission. That's why it is appropriately a mission center. All those mission centers are missions. The directorates represent those capabilities that are then forward deployed. On the issue of integration, absolutely right. There is a balance that needs to be struck. Just like you don't want to have everybody independent and separated from one another, what you don't want to do is to bring everybody together because it's just impossible and unwieldy. So what is that right balance? And what we're trying to do at CIA is not to diminish in any way the cultures that developed in different parts of the agency over our last 69 years. Just like the Marines' identity, that esprit de corps in the Marine Corps, was not diminished in any way by Goldwater Nichols. They still have that pride of being a Marine. Same thing in the Army,
Right.
Air Force, and others.
Right.
Same thing inside of CIA. There's great pride in being a case officer, an operations officer. Great pride in being what I think is the gold standard of analysis and being an analyst in CIA. So we want to try to leverage that pride, but bring it together so that they are able to, again, interact with one another in a manner that empowers both of their capabilities and mission. Now, when I look out I was part of the stand-up of the National Counterterrorism Center, and we could create a self-sustaining organization, but the real challenge in setting that up from scratch was how are you going to make sure that it interoperates with the rest of the counterterrorism ecosystem? And that counterterrorism ecosystem, though, is embedded within an intelligence community ecosystem, which is in part of the national security system and the government. So the real challenge looking out, and the next administration is going to have this certainly in spades, how are you going to ensure that you design the system so that you have the optimal advantage of the capabilities, the networks, the authorities, the nodes, the expertise that resides in the US government that is bigger than any other government, that has tremendous capability. So it's not just a question of putting together the IT architecture that will facilitate and enable interaction. It is putting together the mission architecture that allows you to leverage the data, the authorities, the people, the expertise, the operational authorities, whatever, and doing it at the speed of light. And you can always migrate more and more into it. So the systems engineers are the ones that I look to try to ensure that individual components are configured in an optimal fashion, and those components interact with the rest of the environment in an optimal fashion. And so I think it's very important for us to have dynamic structures that you're able to continue to adapt, because the operating environment that we're in right now is changing at the speed of light. The technological innovations that have come forward over the last decade have profoundly changed the intelligence business. CIA having to operate clandestinely overseas in an environment where the digital domain is so ubiquitous, and everything we do, we pick up digital dust. How are we going to be able to operate, whether it be in Russia, China, wherever, and do it anonymously, do it without any type of trace of an intelligence mission? This is something that is very challenging.
Exactly. And if there's one thing I've learned from looking at some centuries of intelligence history, it is that the successful intelligence services have had public-private partnerships working to support the government. Over and over again, the private sector has been crucial to gaining decision advantage. How are we doing on working with the public sector? We took some big hits. Snowden, the whole discussion over encryption. How do we build partnerships with our industry, private sector colleagues? And we have many of them in the room tonight, and we're very grateful to their support. But what can we do to get this a stronger, more robust relationship?
Well, as you say, we have some tremendous partners that are represented here tonight, and we have longstanding relationships that go back since our founding. And we are exceptionally grateful for those partnerships. Yes, as a result of unauthorized disclosures, we took a number of hits from companies who were very concerned about having their relationship with the intelligence community exposed, which could affect them. And a number of CEOs and boards of directors were almost pleading with the intelligence community to have them compelled to provide support or certain types of data. And that couldn't happen in many instances. And they basically said, given their fiduciary responsibilities, that they could not absorb the costs associated with some type of exposure, that because of the view of the public as well as others, that any type of relationship with the intelligence community, CIA or NSA, was going to taint them in terms of their commercial interests. I think we have been able to overcome a lot of that. We have tremendous interaction with people, not just here in the Washington, D.C. area, a lot of support in Silicon Valley and other areas who recognize that the intelligence community is essential to keeping this country secure and ensuring its future prosperity. I do think there needs to be a much more candid discussion and honest discussion publicly about the role of government in the digital domain. Mm-hmm. This is what is really, I think, going to affect our ability as a government, as an intelligence community, to keep this country safe. And unfortunately, there has been a polarization and a very, I think in some respects, dishonest sort of representation about what it is that the government is doing and what the government wants to do. I was recently at an event where a very, very well-known technologist basically said that, explaining encryption, and then said, well, that's why when the government says they don't want encryption, you know, it is wrong. The government wants encryption. The government wants strong encryption. We rely heavily on that. But what we need to do is to have a national discussion, as well as a national consensus, about what's the appropriate role of the government in that digital domain. When we have adversaries, both nation states as well as organizations as well as individuals, who can do tremendous damage to us and are taking full advantage of that environment, but yet a lot of that environment is totally walled off from the government's ability to care for its people and to fulfill its primary responsibility, which is the security of the country. And so the debate that was raging between the FBI and others in terms of access to data on a mobile device, you can put on a mobile device now information and data that would take up many different warehouses in terms of text and photos and other types of data that could be instrumental, not just in terms of exculpatory information, but also give us insight into what devastating attack we might be facing. And so if we're going to let individual companies decide what the government should and shouldn't be able to have access to, you know, I equate it to if a bank has a safety deposit box and a judge issues a warrant based on probable cause, the bank is obligated to open that up. And I know a lot of people refer to backdoors and other things, but you know, I'm very sympathetic to Jim Comey and others who are saying we need to be able to find a way that we optimize privacy and civil liberties and security of that environment, but at the same time allow the government to fulfill its responsibility for caring for the American people. And I think there has not been an honest discussion on this issue. I had recommended to folks down on the Hill that there be a congressional commission that would be set up at the beginning of the next administration, because it really is going to take many years to be able to have this discussion, that we're going to have the public sector and the private sector come together. This is not a government, you cannot have a government solution to this. The private sector owns and operates 90% of the internet. And so there needs to be this type of interaction and understanding about what the government's role is and what the private sector's responsibilities are.
Well, it's fundamentally a matter of trust, is it not? And one of the elements of trust is this oversight process you're talking about, getting Congress involved and in a collaborative effort to have this conversation. Are our oversight institutions strong enough for that discussion on the Hill? I mean, is this a likely prospect?
You know, among all the 9/11 Commission recommendations that came out from that report, the executive branch carried out many of them, if not most of them. But the recommendations from the 9/11 Commission about the restructuring of the congressional committee structure was never acted upon. And I think a number of committees of jurisdiction are looking at particular aspects of this issue. And it's not just an intelligence issue. It's not just an issue related to Homeland Security. It's not just an issue related to, you know, the judiciary. It really needs to be something that is going to be comprehensive, because that digital domain, that environment, is where most human activity is already taking place, and more of it will take place there. So I do think having a congressional commission that is composed of the government and the private sector, that they can work through these issues and come up with a way forward in terms of how we're going to optimize the various objectives, again, maintaining security, but also ensuring that the government is not going to trample those civil liberties, privacy rights that this country is founded on.
We only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to ask a couple of questions that I've received, and also I'm quite curious about, related to recruitment into the CIA and what you're looking for in terms of people to come in and help with the mission. And as part of that, I know you've launched an important diversity initiative. Can you speak a little bit about how it feels to be an employee at CIA from a diversity perspective?
I can't speak personally to that. But I can speak to the people that I've interacted with, and that we at CIA have launched a major diversity initiative. I asked Vernon Jordan to lead a group of individuals to take a look at our record, and he came out with a study and recommendations last year that we made public that really, I think, held us to account for not realizing the very laudable objectives that we had set for ourselves over the last couple of decades, for a variety of reasons. I think one is that we are so mission-driven that a lot of these strategic initiatives, organizational initiatives, sometimes fall by the wayside as we have to deal with inbox issues and other things. But we have made it a major part of our modernization and mission effort to bring in as diverse a workforce as possible. I can see no other agency that can make a stronger case for diversity than CIA. We have to cover the world. We have to understand the world's problems, the world's challenges, the world's opportunities. That requires the perspectives of a diverse workforce, diverse experiences, and so what we're trying to do also is to maybe update some of our security practices, because in the past, a number of people hit a wall because they still had family in a certain country, and we weren't able to resolve some outstanding issues that maybe our security professionals had come up with 20 years ago. So we need to recognize that if we're going to have the variety of experiences, the linguistic capabilities that we need, as well as the ability to operate globally, we need to bring that rich diversity into the organization. And so I'm proud of the work that we've done on that, but we still have more work to do.
Great. Well, I think we are at an, am I correct, or do we have more time?
A few more minutes.
Sorry? Time for one more question. All right, I'm sorry to do this to you, but I have to ask.
It's always the last question.
I know. I was so hoping we had more time that I could ask this question. We have one candidate running for president who has talked about enhanced interrogation and torture. I know this is a very sore subject, but it goes back to our discussion about trust and a dialogue with the American people. What is your advice to an incoming administration on this question? As the threats rise and people's fear rise, is it a bad idea to think about enhanced interrogation and torture and changing those goalposts again? Or do you think we're in exactly the right place?
There are a variety of dimensions to this issue and question. As you know, the agency carried out, at the direction of the President, a detention interrogation program that was duly authorized by the Commander-in-Chief. It was like all covert action programs that the agency is involved in, it was rooted in a presidential finding. It was reviewed repeatedly by the Department of Justice. It was deemed to be lawful in terms of the parameters of those enhanced interrogation techniques that were approved. Now, the CIA, in the application of those EITs, in a number of instances, made bad mistakes, and individuals were held to account for that. But we had no experience in putting together a program like that. I think we were ill-prepared to do it. But like we have done throughout our history, when the nation calls, the agency does its best to salute. That's why CIA boots were the first boots on the ground in Afghanistan 2 weeks after 9/11. That's why CIA blood was shed, and the first American killed in Afghanistan was a CIA officer 2 months after 9/11. And so we do our level best to make sure that our family, friends, neighbors, and colleagues here in the States are kept safe by doing what we're asked to do. This program was an example of that. I think we learned a lot of lessons. We've made adjustments in terms of the oversight of our covert action programs. But we will continue to do everything we can, particularly on the counterterrorism front, to prevent these types of devastating attacks that we have seen recently. Now, I have to, as the director of CIA, take into account a number of factors. The CIA suffered in many respects as a result of that program and the mistakes that we made, but also the rampant misrepresentations and mischaracterizations of the agency's work during that period of time. That's why when I look at the Senate's report on the detention interrogation program, It makes my blood boil because although there are a lot of things in there that were accurate, it really just focused and shone a bright light on the shortcomings of the agency during that period of time. If it was done in a more objective, nonpartisan, and fair fashion, it would have put those shortcomings into a better context, because I fervently believe that there was no agency more responsible for preventing a recurrence of 9/11 than CIA. And unfortunately, that report, I think, misrepresented the totality of the worth of that program. I, as an intelligence professional, I can say with great confidence that information that was gleaned from individuals who were subjected to those EITs some of the information was useful in stopping attacks and catching terrorists. As an intelligence professional, as an analyst, I can also say that I cannot establish a cause and effect between the application of those EITs and what an individual subsequently provided, because there were individuals who were not subjected to those EITs that gave up information. There were individuals who were subjected to those EITs that gave up a lot of bogus information as well. So cause and effect is something that I cannot establish. So when I take all of it into account and I look at what happened to the agency and the difficulties we endured as a result of the aftermath and some people's selective memory about what they were briefed on and what they had countenanced, I have to take into account what the institutional equities are. At the same time, I personally believe that we can fulfill our counterterrorism responsibilities and not resort to those EITs. And so when I have been asked if the next president directed me or the CIA to carry out waterboarding, what would I do? Some people have misrepresented, said I would resign. I wouldn't resign. I would have to be fired by any president before I would not agree to that, and they would have to remove me. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing what I can to protect the institution, the men and women of CIA, that sacrifice more than most Americans could even imagine in terms of what they do for this country. I have an obligation to that, and that's why I really believe I have the best job in the world. And that's why people here in INSA, who I think by your very presence signal your interest in doing what you can for the agency, for the rest of the intelligence community, that is critically important, because CIA officers frequently will open up the papers and see all the things that they reportedly are doing and their misdeeds. They don't serve as CIA officers, NGA officers, NSA officers because of the accolades and the ticker tape parades. They serve frequently silently and selflessly in order to ensure that they can contribute to our national defense. So I am not currently, nor do I ever intend to direct CIA officers to engage in those types of techniques as long as I'm director.
John, thank you so much for your candor and for the completeness of the briefing. Thank you.
John and Jennifer both, thank you so much for such a wide-ranging conversation. Everything from counterterrorism to the centers and integration, diversity, and importantly, the public-private partnership that is represented here tonight. John, thank you again so much for giving of your time, for agreeing to come back and give us this update tonight. Thank you for your service. Jennifer, thank you so much. As I said, much better second act. So glad I could turn the microphone over to you. And we have for you a memento for tonight. It is the coveted, renowned INSA candy dish. And it comes with free refills.
Hey.
So that means we'd like to see you back. So Jennifer, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
John, you probably have a few INSA candy dishes. You've probably given more INSA candy dishes than I have. So we thought about this long and hard and thought no better memento than a framed picture of John and his many appearances, both while you were in the job and
nice.
since, to remember you by all your friends.
Thank
at
you.
INSA.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for thanks.
And if you don't mind.
Oh, we have to get the picture.
And maybe one, Herman, without. There we go.
Yeah, the lawyers may not let you use that one.
Thank you all for coming. If you are driving, please drive safely. In any event, please arrive home safely. Thank you all so much.